Sessions, we having sessions, we locked in, you better tap in. Sessions, we having sessions, we locked in, you better tap in.
It's all beat. I'm sorry.
Sessions, we having sessions, we locked in, you better tap in. Sessions, we having sessions, we locked in, you better tap in.
Hey, hey, hey. Topics of the day. Sessions topics.
Sessions, we having sessions, we locked in, you better tap in. Welcome back.
Welcome back to another great episode of Sessions QC, hottest podcast. And welcome back to Sessions QC, where we dive into the hidden truths, the forgotten stories, and the questions that shape who we are today. I'm your host, E-Dub, and today we're asking a powerful question. What if the story of Black people in America is even deeper than Africa? We've been taught that every African American is here because of the transatlantic slave trade. And while that story is real, it might not be the whole story. What if many of us were already here? What if some of our ancestors were not just Africans brought across the ocean, but the very native people of this land, reclassified, renamed, and erased from their official record? Tonight's episode is called Where Do We Go From Here? The History of Blacks as Native Americans. Let's unpack this thought together. Let's start at the beginning. Before Columbus, before Jamestown, before the ships full of shackles, back in 1976, historian Ivan Van Sertima wrote a groundbreaking book called They Came Before Columbus. In it, he argued that Africans crossed the Atlantic centuries before Europeans ever set sail. His evidence included the massive Olmec stone heads in Mexico, carved nearly 3,000 years ago. Statues with broad noses and full lips, features many scholars say resemble West Africans. Now, Van Sertima wasn't the only one. Spanish colonist Bartolome de las Casas, writing in the 1500s, described seeing what he called Black Indians. When Europeans first stepped foot in the Americas, these weren't enslaved Africans brought over. They were people already here. And then there's the story of the Black Seminoles, escaped Africans in the South who joined with the Seminole tribes of Florida. Together, they fought against the U.S. Army, forming one of the strongest alliances of resistance in American history. Historian Daniel Littlefield writes about this in Africans and Seminoles. From removal to emancipation, these alliances show us that Black and Native identities have been braided together for centuries. And if you talk to everyday folk, not just historians, you'll hear the same thing. So many Black families will tell you. My grandmother said we're Cherokee, or my great grandfather said we're Choctaw. Oral history has always been our truth teller, even when textbooks ignored us. But if this history is so real, why don't we see it in the records? The answer is what some call paper genocide. Then that's when the government deliberately erased Native ancestry by changing people's classification. That goes to the saying, to the victors go the spoils, huh? Then we take the dolls rolls into thought. Government lists made between 1898 and 1914 to decide who was officially recognized as Native American. Thousands of people with African and Native heritage was excluded. Instead, they were labeled freedmen. That label cut them off from tribal identity, land rights, and recognition. Then there was Walter Plecker, the registrar in Virginia during the early 1900s. He led the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, which forced everyone to be classified as either white or colored. If you were Native, you were erased, written down as Black. That meant whole communities lost their tribal standing overnight. Dr. Jack Forbes, in his book Africans and Native Americans, calls this the evolution of red Black peoples, where race labels were shifted to serve the government's needs. And let's be clear, the motive wasn't just about identity. It was about land, power, and money. If you erase someone's native heritage, you erase their claim to the land, you erase their sovereignty, you erase their history. But here's the thing, no amount of paperwork can kill the truth. The Black Seminoles, also called Maroons, carried their culture and memory with them through war, exile, and forced removal. Even today, descendants in Oklahoma and Texas fight to be recognized as full members of the Seminole Nation. The Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture even has an exhibit on the Seminole Maroons showing how their story is both Black history and Native history. And it's not just Seminoles. Across the country, movements are rising where African Americans are reclaiming their indigenous roots. Groups like the Washita Nation and Yamis people push back against the idea that Black identity in America is only tied to Africa. Now, some of these groups are controversial, but they reveal something powerful, a hunger to remember who we really are. And if you look at our, and if you look into it, you will see that even in our culture, the call and response of spirituals, the stomp rhythm of blues, these aren't just African retentions, they echo native traditions as well. We've been blending cultures for centuries, whether the history books acknowledge it or not. So, what do we do with all of this? Dr. Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, in An Indigenous People's History of the United States, reminds us that identity isn't just about ancestry, it's political. If we accept that African Americans have indigenous roots, then we also have indigenous claims to land, to reparations, to history itself. And that raises real questions. If we're both African and Native, does that strengthen the case for reparations? Does it give us new ground to stand on when we talk about justice? But maybe the biggest question is unity. Too often, history has been used to divide us: Africans versus Native, tribe versus tribe, color versus color. What if reclaiming this hidden history could do the opposite? What if it could remind us that we've always been connected, always been fighting the same fight? As Dr. Jack Forbes put it, Africans and natives weren't separate stories. They were intertwined from the start, and maybe that's what we need to reclaim most of all. James Baldwin once said, "Know from whence you came. If you know whence you came, there are absolutely no limitations to where you can go." We've looked back tonight at Olmec heads, Seminole warriors, Dawes rolls, and erased names. But all of it brings us to one simple question. If this is our past, then where do we go from here? I want to leave that with you, the listener. Ask your elders. Dig into your family tree. Look beyond what's written on paper and trust the stories that have survived. Because in the end, history isn't just about where we came from, it's about where we're going. Thank you for tuning in to Sessions QC.